She was just a nurse, the smallest one on the floor. He was a 7-foot giant, a patient no one could touch, a storm of silent fury trapped in a hospital bed. Her boss, the celebrated Dr. Finch, called her incompetent and tried to fire her in front of everyone. But he made one mistake. He didn't know who she really was. And he never saw the signal she gave the man in the expensive suit. Now, let me take you inside the chaos of St. Jude's Critical Care Unit, where the antiseptic smell of bleach fought a losing battle against the metallic tang of fear. Alara Vance existed in the quiet spaces. At 5'2", she was a study in controlled energy, a ghost in pale blue scrubs who moved through the high-stakes theater of the CCU with a precision that bordered on invisible. Her hands, though small, were steady as a surgeon's. Her observations were sharp, her notes meticulous, her presence so unassuming that most of the staff, including her direct superior, often looked straight through her. This was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed her to work without the exhausting bluster and ego that plagued so much of the hospital's hierarchy. She could focus on the patients, on the minute-to-minute data streams that told the real stories of the bodies fighting for life in their sterile beds. The rhythmic beep of a healthy heart monitor was her favorite song. The hiss of a ventilator, a sacred breath. The curse had a name, Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch was the head of critical care, a man sculpted from charisma and ambition. To the hospital board, he was a miracle worker, a brilliant physician with a photogenic smile and statistics that gleamed. To the patients' families, he was a god in a white coat, his voice as smooth and reassuring as expensive whiskey. To Alara and the few other nurses who saw behind the curtain, he was a monster of negligence wrapped in a bespoke suit. He was a shortcut artist, a gambler who played with lives instead of chips, always betting on the most likely outcome and burying his mistakes in paperwork and blame. His confidence was a shield made of silence and authority, and he wielded it to crush anyone who questioned him. He particularly despised Alara. He couldn't put his finger on why. It was something in her quiet efficiency that unnerved him, something in her steady, observant gaze that felt like a judgment. She never challenged him outright, never raised her voice, but her very presence was an indictment of his sloppy, self-serving methods. He saw her meticulous double checks of his medication orders, her silent recalibration of a machine he had set hastily. He felt it as a personal affront. So he made it his mission to grind her down, to prove that her carefulness was incompetence, her silence a lack of intelligence. "Nurse Vance," he had boomed just that morning, his voice echoing in the otherwise hushed corridor, making a junior nurse jump. He held up a chart, his finger jabbing at a note she had made. "Is it your professional medical opinion that a patient's emotional state could be a factor in their fluctuating blood pressure? Or did you just get a new set of aromatherapy candles with your online psychology degree?" A few of the interns had snickered. Alara had simply looked at him, her face a polite blank mask. "I noted the patient became agitated after a family visit, doctor. The spike in pressure correlated directly with that event. I thought it was relevant information for the attending physician." "You thought," Finch had repeated, savoring the words like a fine wine. "Don't think, nurse. Follow orders, chart the numbers, leave the complex diagnostics to those of us with an actual medical degree." He had tossed the chart onto the counter and swept away, leaving her in a wake of humiliation and his cloying, overpriced cologne. She had picked up the chart, her knuckles white for just a second, and then the moment passed. She smoothed her scrubs, her expression unreadable, and went back to work. She was a professional. This was the job. You swallowed the bile and saved the patient. But today was different. Today, the chaos arrived on a reinforced gurney, pushed by 4 straining orderlies and flanked by 2 grim-faced paramedics. He was a giant. That was the only word for him. He had to be at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the fluorescent lights overhead. His body was a roadmap of hardened muscle and old silvery scars that crisscrossed his skin like angry tributaries. A thick, unkempt beard covered the lower half of his face, but it couldn't hide the fierce, defiant set of his jaw. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, were wide with a trapped, hunted animal's terror. He was conscious, but not communicative. He thrashed against the restraints, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. He wasn't just a patient. He was a force of nature, a one-man siege. "Severe blunt force trauma, possible internal bleeding, multiple lacerations," one of the paramedics gasped, trying to keep pace. Found at a construction site collapse. No identification. John Doe. He's taken out 2 of my guys already. Be careful. Dr. Finch, smelling a high-profile emergency, descended upon the scene like a king arriving at a joust. All right, clear the area. Get me a full trauma workup. I want bloods, a CT scan, and push 10 milligrams of diazepam, now. It was a standard textbook order. It was also completely wrong. Alara saw it instantly. She was standing back, her instincts keeping her at the edge of the storm, observing. She didn't see a random construction worker. She saw the way he moved, even in restraints. It wasn't the clumsy flailing of a delirious civilian. It was methodical, tactical. He was testing his bonds, using leverage, conserving energy. His eyes weren't just wild, they were scanning, assessing threats, mapping the room, and the scars. They weren't from factory machines or falling debris. One on his forearm was a perfect puckered circle, a bullet wound, an old one. The jagged line across his clavicle looked like a shrapnel tear. His hands, raw and scraped from the accident, were still calloused in a way that spoke of years holding something heavy, something with a stock and a trigger. This man was a soldier, or had been, and a soldier with that level of hypervigilance, that combat-ready posture, would not respond to sedatives the way a civilian would. Diazepam would either do nothing or send him into a state of paradoxical rage. "Doctor," a nurse said, her voice trembling as she tried to get an IV line in. "I can't get a vein. He's fighting too hard." The giant let out a roar and snapped a leather restraint with a single violent jerk of his arm. An orderly who was leaning too close was thrown backward, crashing into a supply cart with a sickening thud. Panic flared. Finch's face, usually a mask of calm superiority, was turning a blotchy red. "Double the dose. Just get it into him. Intramuscular if you have to." "That won't work," Alara said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but in the sudden lull of fear, it cut through the air. Finch spun on her, his eyes blazing. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for all day. "Excuse me, Nurse Vance, are you countermanding my direct order in the middle of a critical emergency?" "No, doctor," she said, her gaze fixed on the patient. "I'm offering a professional observation. His physiology suggests he'll have an adverse reaction. He's exhibiting signs of severe combat-related post-traumatic stress. The sedatives will feel like an attack. He'll fight harder." "Combat stress?" Finch laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "He's a construction worker, you imbecile. What combat has he seen? A war with a nail gun? Now do your job or get the hell out of my ER." Before she could respond, the situation was taken out of their hands. The main doors to the CCU slid open with a soft hiss, and a different kind of authority entered the room. 4 men. All of them wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that failed to conceal the athletic, rigid frames beneath. They moved together, a silent, coordinated unit. The man in the lead was older, with silver hair cropped close to his scalp and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes, a deep, commanding gray, swept over the scene, taking in the chaos, the injured orderly, Finch's blustering, and the thrashing giant on the gurney. His expression was one of profound, icy disappointment. Finch's demeanor shifted instantly. The angry tyrant vanished, replaced by the smooth, in-control physician. He strode towards the men, extending a hand that was politely ignored. "Gentlemen," Finch said, his voice oozing confidence. "Dr. Alistair Finch, head of critical care. We have the situation under control, a bit of a feisty one, but nothing my team can't handle." The man with the silver hair didn't even look at him. His entire focus was on the patient. "The situation," he said, his voice low and clipped, at toward a perfectly formed piece of ice, "looks like a complete failure of control, doctor." Finch's smile faltered. "We're just administering a sedative. He'll be calm in a moment." The man's gaze finally shifted to Finch, and it was like being pinned by a glacier. "You will do no such thing. You will cease all treatment until I've had a moment to assess him myself." It wasn't a request. It was an order from a man who had never had one disobeyed. Alara watched, her heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She recognized the man's bearing instantly. The way he stood, the way his men flanked him, the absolute stillness that radiated from him. He was military, high-ranking, very high-ranking. This changed everything. Finch, however, was too arrogant to see it. His authority had been challenged in his own kingdom, in front of his staff and these powerful-looking strangers. His ego wouldn't allow it. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Finch said, puffing out his chest. I'm the attending physician, and this man is my patient. I'm responsible for his life. Now, if you'll please step back and let us work. The man in the suit took one step closer, his 5'11" frame somehow towering over the taller doctor. You are responsible, doctor. That is the only thing you have said that I agree with, and I am holding you responsible for this debacle. Now, stand aside. The giant on the gurney chose that moment to roar again, a sound of pure, undiluted agony and fury. He bucked so hard the entire gurney lifted off the floor for a second. The remaining restraint on his left arm snapped. He was free, or at least one arm was. He swung it wildly, and the nurses and doctors who had been hovering nearby scattered like pigeons. All except Alara. She stood her ground. She didn't move forward. She didn't move back. She simply held her position, a small, unshakable rock in a sea of chaos. Her eyes were locked on the giant, not with fear, but with a deep, profound, and sorrowful understanding. Not a patient, not a monster, a soldier, a brother in arms lost in the fog of war, fighting a battle on a field no one else could see. The silver-haired man noticed her stillness. His sharp eyes flickered from the giant to her, and for a half-second, a question appeared in their depths. Who was this tiny nurse who wasn't screaming, who wasn't running? The giant's wild eyes landed on her. He was panting, his massive chest heaving. He saw her not as a threat, but as something different, something that wasn't moving, wasn't shouting, wasn't trying to stick him with needles. He paused his thrashing, his gaze fixed on her. Alara held his gaze. She gave a slow, deliberate blink. An old signal. I am not a threat. I am calm. Match my calm. He growled again, a low warning, but he didn't move toward her. A fragile, unspoken truce hung in the air. And then Finch, the fool, broke it. For God's sake, somebody grab him! He shrieked, his composure completely shattered. He grabbed the largest syringe he could find from a nearby tray, a dose of sedative that could knock out a horse, and lunged toward the giant's exposed side. No! Alara shouted, her voice finally ringing out with an authority that stunned everyone. But it was too late. The giant saw the needle coming. He saw the aggressive movement. He saw an attack. His training took over. He moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size. He didn't just swat the syringe away. He caught Finch's arm, twisting it with brutal efficiency. There was a wet, snapping sound. Finch screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony, and collapsed to the floor, clutching his clearly broken wrist. The syringe clattered across the linoleum. The giant stood, half off the gurney, a wounded, cornered beast, his chest heaving, his wild eyes promising death to the next person who came near him. The room was frozen in absolute terror. The men in suits had their hands inside their jackets, ready to draw weapons. The hospital security guards were fumbling for their tranquilizer guns. And in the middle of it all, Alara knew, with chilling certainty, that this was it. The moment it all went wrong. They were going to kill him. They were going to fill him with drugs or bullets because a fool in a white coat couldn't see the man inside the monster. The patient's vital signs monitor, which had been reconnected in a brief moment of calm, suddenly started to shriek. A frantic, high-pitched alarm. His blood pressure was crashing. His oxygen saturation was plummeting. His face, which had been flushed with rage, was turning a dusky, terrifying blue. He gasped, a horrible, wet, gurgling sound, and clutched at his own massive chest. His eyes rolled back in his head. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was dying, right here, right now. He's in cardiogenic shock. Get the crash cart, a resident yelled, his voice cracking with panic. No, it's not his heart, Alara said, her voice cutting through the noise again. She was moving now, her mind a cold, clear machine of calculation and diagnosis. She saw the distended veins in his neck, the asymmetrical movement of his chest when he tried to breathe. The signs were classic, textbook, for someone with his injuries. Finch, cradling his broken arm, looked up from the floor, his face pale and slick with sweat. What are you talking about? It's a pulmonary embolism. He threw a clot. He has a tension pneumothorax, Alara stated, her voice devoid of any doubt. The blunt force trauma must have punctured his lung. It's filling his chest cavity with air, crushing his heart and his other lung. The crash cart won't help. He'll be dead in 90 seconds if we don't decompress his chest. She was right. She knew she was right. It was a common battlefield injury. She had treated it a dozen times in dusty, blood-soaked tents with the sound of mortars in the distance. Finch, even in his agony, couldn't stand it. "You're a nurse. You don't make diagnoses. You will do as I say," he hissed from the floor. "Prepare to administer." This was the moment, the precipice. Obey the chain of command and watch a man die, or break every rule in the book to save a life. If you were Alara, faced with an order that would kill a patient from a man who despised you, would you risk your entire career and future on what you knew to be right? Or would you stand down and follow the protocol, letting tragedy unfold as ordained by the hierarchy? Alara made her choice. She didn't hesitate. She turned her back on Finch. She turned her back on the terrified residents and the panicking nurses. She looked directly at the man with the silver hair, the man in charge, General Marcus Thorne, though she didn't know his name yet. She just knew what he was, a commander. She held his gaze. Her face was calm, her eyes intense, and she lifted her right hand to her own chest. She tapped her clavicle twice with 2 fingers. Then she swept her hand across her throat in a sharp, flat line. It was not a gesture anyone in that room would have understood. It was obscure, archaic, from a manual that hadn't been in general circulation for a decade. It was a signal used by elite forward-operating combat medics, a signal for a mass casualty event when radios were down. It meant catastrophic airway and thoracic compromise. Cat 1 patient, I have the solution, requesting tactical override of local command. Acknowledge. It was a signal that said, without a single word, I am one of you. Trust me. General Thorne's eyes, which had been cold and hard, widened almost imperceptibly. His breath caught. For a flicker of a second, his mask of command slipped, and something akin to disbelief showed on his face. He knew the signal. Of course he knew it. He had probably helped write the damn manual it came from. He looked from her small, determined face to the dying giant on the gurney, and he understood. He saw the truth she had seen. He saw the soldier. He gave a single sharp nod. It was all she needed. He turned to Finch, who was still trying to bark orders from the floor. Thorne's voice was not loud, but it silenced the entire room. "Doctor, you are relieved of command." He then looked at his own men, who were tense and ready for violence. "Stand down, all of you." He swept his gaze over the stunned hospital staff. "Give her whatever she asks for, now." Finch stared, dumbfounded. "You can't do that. Who the hell are you?" Thorne ignored him completely. His focus was on Alara, and Alara was already in motion. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The quiet, unassuming nurse vanished. In her place stood a field medic at the point of injury, a commander in her own right. The hunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a laser focus. Her posture straightened. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whip-crack of authority. "I need a 14-gauge angiocath, a large one, and a bottle of betadine. Now!" She barked at the nearest resident, who was staring at her with his mouth open. He blinked, then scrambled to obey as if she were the chief of surgery. "You," she pointed to another nurse, "keep your eyes on that monitor. Call out his SEATs every 5 seconds. You," to a third, "hold his head. Keep his airway clear. Don't let him aspirate." They all moved, galvanized by the sheer force of her certainty. The paralysis of fear was broken, replaced by the fluid motion of professionals with a purpose she had just given them. The resident slapped the catheter and antiseptic into her hand. Alara moved to the giant's side. He was unconscious now, his breathing a terrifyingly shallow rasp. She didn't hesitate. She ripped his gown open, exposing the vast, scarred landscape of his chest. "Sats are at 78% and falling," the nurse at the monitor called out. Alara's hands were a blur of efficient motion. She swabbed a patch of skin on his right side with the betadine. Her fingers probed his ribs, finding the exact spot by feel, by a memory burned into her hands through years of practice. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right over the top of the third rib to avoid the neurovascular bundle underneath. She uncapped the long, thick needle. 74%. She braced her hand against his chest, took a breath, and with a single, smooth, powerful motion, she plunged the entire length of the catheter into his chest cavity. There was an immediate, audible hiss. It was the sound of trapped air, of a week's worth of pressure, escaping the prison of his pleural space. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Sats are climbing. 85%. The giant's body gave a huge, shuddering gasp. It was a real breath, deep and full. The ugly blue tint of his skin began to recede, replaced by a healthier, pinker shade. 92%! 95! We're stable at 97%! The nurse cried out, her voice thick with relief and awe. Alara worked quickly, pulling the needle out while leaving the flexible plastic catheter in place, creating a makeshift one-way valve. She taped it down securely. The immediate danger was over. She had pulled him back from the very edge of the abyss. A profound silence fell over the room. It was broken only by the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a perfect, healthy rhythm, the song she loved most. Everyone stared at her, at the smallest nurse in the ward who had just single-handedly saved the life of a man no one else could even touch, who had disobeyed a direct order from the head of the department and defied a half-dozen armed men to do it. Finch was still on the floor, his face a mask of disbelief, rage, and profound gut-wrenching humiliation. His kingdom had been usurped, his authority shattered. And it had been done by the one person he considered the most insignificant. Alara stood up straight, wiping a stray drop of sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. She felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. But beneath it, there was a cold, professional fury, a fury at the incompetence that had almost cost a good man his life. She looked down at the patient. His eyes were still closed, but his breathing was deep and even. The lines of pain on his face had softened. For the first time since he had arrived, he looked peaceful. She gently placed her hand on his forehead, brushing back his sweat-dampened hair. "You're okay, Sergeant," she whispered, so quietly no one else could hear. "You're safe now." General Thorne walked slowly towards her, his footsteps the only sound in the silent room. The other suited men remained at a respectful distance, their expressions a mixture of relief and astonishment. He stopped in front of her, his granite-carved face unreadable for a moment. He looked down at the stabilized patient, then back at her. His gray eyes were no longer cold. They were filled with a deep, penetrating respect. "That was the finest piece of field medicine I've witnessed in 20 years, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Where did you serve, son?" Then he caught himself, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "Apologies, force of habit. Where did you serve, Nurse Vance?" "Pararescue, sir," she replied, her voice steady, automatically falling back into the cadence of military protocol. 3rd Battalion, 24th Special Tactics Squadron. I was a staff sergeant." Thorne nodded slowly, as if a final piece of a complex puzzle had just clicked into place. Pararescue jumpers, the PJs, their motto was, "That others may live." They were the elite of the elite, combat medics who went behind enemy lines to save downed pilots and wounded soldiers. It explained everything. Her calm, her skill, her signal. "Staff Sergeant Vance," he said, the title feeling more natural on his tongue than nurse. "I should have known. There are only a handful of people in the world who would know that signal." Finch, finally helped to his feet by 2 bewildered orderlies, decided he had been silent long enough. His face was contorted with pain and incandescent rage. "This is outrageous. She broke every protocol in the book. She assaulted a patient with an unapproved procedure. I am the head of this department and I am pressing charges. She is fired. And you," he spat at Thorne, "you have no authority here. I'll have you arrested for interfering with medical personnel." General Thorne turned his head slowly to look at Finch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer weight of his authority was enough to make the air in the room feel heavy. "Dr. Finch," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you are correct about one thing. I do not have medical authority in this hospital." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "However, my authority comes from the Department of Defense, and the man you almost killed," he gestured to the patient, "is not John Doe, a construction worker. He is Sergeant Major Thomas Kane, a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross and one of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced." A collective gasp went through the room. "Sergeant Major Kane was injured during a classified operation," Thorne continued, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "An operation that, I assure you, involved far more than a war with a nail gun. We brought him here because this hospital was supposed to be the best. We had concerns, however, about your performance metrics. They seemed too good to be true, so we decided to observe his intake personally." Thorne took a small, almost casual step toward Finch, who instinctively recoiled. Your performance today, doctor, has been illuminating. You misdiagnosed his condition. You ordered a contraindicated medication that would have exacerbated his state. You failed to control the environment, resulting in injury to your staff and yourself. And when a member of your team, a highly decorated and experienced combat medic, correctly identified a life-threatening injury, you tried to stop her. You actively obstructed the saving of a man's life out of sheer pathetic ego. Every word was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing Finch's career and reputation in front of his entire staff. My concerns were not unfounded, Thorne went on, his voice dropping even lower. My team has been conducting a quiet investigation for the past 3 weeks. We found a pattern. You've been cutting costs by using expired anesthetics in non-critical surgeries. You've been falsifying patient charts to hide post-operative infections. You've been billing for procedures that were never performed. You have turned this place of healing into your own personal bank account, and you have endangered dozens of lives to do it. Finch's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. That's a lie. It's slander. You have no proof. Thorne simply raised an eyebrow. Don't I? He gave a subtle nod toward the doorway. 2 more men entered. They were not dressed in suits. They wore the crisp uniforms of the military police, and they were accompanied by 2 stern-looking detectives from the local police department. Dr. Alistair Finch, one of the detectives said, his voice flat and official. You're under arrest for reckless endangerment, insurance fraud, and criminal negligence. Finch stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a dawning, abject horror. It was over. He was ruined. The cuffs clicked shut around his one good wrist. As they led him away, his eyes met Alara's. In them, she saw no remorse, no understanding, just pure, unadulterated hatred for the small, quiet woman who had brought his entire world crashing down. She felt nothing, just a quiet, empty space where the humiliation used to be. With Finch gone, the tension in the room finally broke. A nervous chatter filled the air as the staff began to process the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. General Thorne turned back to Alara. Staff Sergeant Vance? Alara, my team is taking over Sergeant Major Kane's care. We're moving him to a military facility where he can be treated by people who understand his needs. I want you to come with us. Alara blinked, surprised. Sir? This is not a request, he clarified, though his tone was gentle. It's a job offer. I'm creating a new position, a civilian liaison and special medical consultant for my operational teams. You'd oversee the care of my people when they're stateside. You'd vet facilities. You'd train medics. You'd make sure a disaster like this never happens again. He looked at her, his expression serious. I've already had my aide pull your file. Your service record is impeccable. 4 tours, Bronze Star with Valor. You left the service after being wounded in the line of duty. An honorable discharge. The Air Force never should have let you go. Alara had built a wall around that part of her life. A quiet, orderly civilian existence to keep the memories at bay. She had thought she was done with that world, but standing here, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, she realized she had never truly left it. She had just been waiting for the call to come home. What about him? She asked, her gaze shifting to Sergeant Major Kane. Will he be okay? He has a long road ahead, Thorne admitted. The physical wounds will heal. The ones you can't see, those are harder. But now he has a chance. You gave him that chance. She nodded, a decision solidifying in her heart. I accept the position, sir. A genuine smile finally graced Thorne's face. I was hoping you'd say that. Welcome back to the fight, Sergeant. He left her to make the arrangements, his men quietly and efficiently beginning the process of preparing Kane for transport. The hospital staff kept their distance, watching Alara with a new kind of respect, tinged with awe and a little bit of fear. She was no longer just one of them. She was something more. Alara walked over to Kane's bedside. He was beginning to stir, his eyelids fluttering. The raw terror was gone from his face, replaced by a weary confusion. His pale blue eyes opened and focused on her. There was no recognition, not yet, just the wariness of a man who had learned to trust no one. She leaned in close, her voice soft. Easy, Sergeant Major. You're among friends. She used his proper title, a sign of respect, Then she added a phrase, a bit of old soldier's slang from a particularly rough campaign in a forgotten corner of the world, a phrase only someone who had been there would know. The dust has settled. His eyes widened. That he understood. It was a code. It meant the fight was over. The immediate danger had passed. You could breathe. He stared at her small, calm face. He saw the quiet strength in her eyes, the competence in her steady hands. He saw a fellow warrior. Slowly, hesitantly, he lifted his massive, trembling hand. Alara met him halfway, her small fingers wrapping around his. His grip was surprisingly gentle. She took his wrist, her fingers finding his pulse. It was strong and steady. He let her. For the first time since he had crashed through the doors of the CCU, the giant, the monster, the man no one could touch was still. He was grounded. He was safe. Alara stood there for a long time, holding his hand, the steady beep of the monitor a quiet testament to the life she had refused to let go. The exhaustion was a heavy cloak on her shoulders, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the weariness that comes after a battle won, after a brother brought home. The world had tried to make her small, had tried to make her invisible. But in the heart of the storm, she had remembered her own strength. She was not the smallest nurse in the ward. She was Staff Sergeant Alara Vance, and she was right where she belonged. The quiet, exhausted relief washed over her, clean and pure. It was the feeling of vindication, not loud or triumphant, but a deep, resonant hum of rightness in the center of her soul. She had not sought the fight, but it had come for her, and she had met it, and she had won. If you believe competence should always triumph over corruption, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us tell more stories like Alara's. Now let me ask you, have you ever had a hidden skill that nobody knew about? Let me know in the comments below, and get ready, because the next story is locked and loaded right on your screen.